What we are going to show you here on the video is actually from November the 9th, which is Kristallnacht. And that was memorialized in Los Angeles in the Wiesenthal Center. Actually, it was in Beverly Hilton Hotel. And there was 1,200 very beautiful people. And we, at the same time, they celebrated Jeffrey Katzenberg of the movie fame. And so I think we should show this before, and that actually tells the whole story. Then I don't have to say anything. Is that the best we can do?
During the Nazi Holocaust, few acquitted themselves with greater honor than the Danish people, who stood up for human dignity against all odds. This is one such story of a Danish police officer and who, in the face of Nazi brutality, decided, not in my country. Each time he began another rescue mission, he put not only his own life on the line, but the lives of his family and friends as well. Many would have considered the challenge too daunting, but he considered it his duty as a Christian, as a human being. Please direct your attention to the screen for the story of Knud Dybe.
April 9th, 1940.
This
in a surprise move, Germany invaded Denmark, overpowered its small army, and occupied the country. Like most of his countrymen, a young Danish police officer, Knud Dybe, was shocked and saddened. To the Nazi, King Christian declared himself a political prisoner and refused to leave the palace. The Danish cabinet resigned. The Danish Navy deliberately sank its remaining ships in the harbor. The Nazis immediately took control of the government. October 1st, 1943, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. The Nazis chose that date for a surprise action to round up Denmark's Jews and deport them to concentration camps. After details of the action were leaked to two Danish political leaders, plans went into effect that led to one of the most dramatic and effective acts of rescue during World War II.
People absolutely unorganized and miraculously took upon themselves to save the Jews. They went in and took them out of their own apartments and invited them into their homes, into summer homes, churches, and hospitals, where they were put to bed in various wards under the name of Jensen and Peterson and Larsen.
On the day of the roundup, the Nazis were only able to arrest 256 Jews, while more than 7,000 remained hidden throughout Denmark in various places. But the Danish people would not keep thousands of Jews in forever. So a plan unfolded to take advantage of the Danish tradition of being a seafaring nation. Danish fishing boats would be used to spear up Jews to neutral Sweden. Knud Dybye was one of the first to become involved in this effort.
Being a yachtsman, I knew some fishermen at the North Harbor where we repaired our boats for the seasons. So a colleague of mine asked me to take a group of his neighbor, a grocer by the name of Jacobsen, down to the boat and get them over to Sweden together with his family.
There were 8 people in the family, and Dybye moved them in 2 groups, first in streetcars and then in taxis to the harbor. He hid them in the sheds where the fishermen normally kept their nets and tools, and then in the cover of night moved them onto the fishing boats.
Fortunately for us, October they're very dark nights and partly rainy nights as well. So all the sailings were done in the dark of the night. Thanks to the colleagues in the police department.
Rescuers of the Shoah from San Francisco, Mr. Knud Dybye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, shalom. It is indeed my honor invited to this national tribute dinner for Mr. Katzenberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, especially because I am invited as one of the righteous rescuers. There is not a group of people in the whole world that I would rather represent than the righteous. As Rabbi Schubert once said, nor saints, nor Superman or Superwoman, but people of flesh and bone, like yours and mine, who risks security, safety, life itself to aid the 100. I represent also my fellow Danes who 1943 at Rosh Hashanah completely spontaneously rebelled against the Nazi occupiers and sheltered more than 7,000 Danish Jews. While the Wehrmacht and Gestapo, the first night, arrested only 256. Neighbors and friends
opened not only their hearts, but their apartments, hospitals, and summer homes. The Torah and valuables from the synagogue in Copenhagen were wrapped in clothes and transported in an ambulance into a Protestant church where it was sick. The Jews could not safely stay for a long time in their hiding places. They had to be transported over to the neutral Sweden. There wasn't any Moses to part the waters of the Baltic between the countries. So my friends and I relied on fetching the refugees to get them on board the fishing boats or schooners. After 1984, I was asked to tell my story at schools, colleges, and synagogues. I have promoted what I call the 3 C's: compassion, conscience, and grace. There's something I do not have here, but I want you to know that because my Polish colleagues did not help the Germans in any way. In fact, the Germans knew that we would go against them. But 1,900 of my colleagues were arrested on September 19th, 1944, sent to Loung and Buchenwald. As a retired rescuer, I've been shown so much gratitude and love from the Jewish communities. It is absolutely heartwarming. And I also have the privilege to congratulate Mr. Katzenberg, there it is, to the honor and to express my appreciation to the Wiesenthal Center for their unending work for remembrance, healing, and great charity towards the righteous and the survivors of the Holocaust. Thank you.
And now I'd like to share a video message from 2 of Jeffrey's good friends. And I'll give you a little hint, they're maybe the only 2 friends more important than Stephen and David.
What do we have here?
Yeah.
With all due respect. Please watch the video.
I'm taking a video of the video of the video.
Hillary and I are so pleased to have this opportunity to join you in honoring our good friend. The Simon Wiesenthal Center and its Museum of Tolerance could not have selected a more deserving individual to receive the humanitarian award of the century. I also want to take a moment to recognize tonight's other honorees for overcoming the evils of the Holocaust and for transforming your pain into compassionate action. Jeffrey, for so many years now, your creativity and innovation have touched the lives of people around the world, bringing the magic of dreams to people of all ages. From the adventures of Aladdin to the lessons of the Lion King, to the romance of Beauty and the Beast, you have lit up movie screens everywhere, entertaining millions of families and showing children there really are no limits to their imaginations. And you've done so in the right way, with colorful and lively animation, not gratuitous violence. You brought that same creativity and the same optimism to the work you've done for so many important causes, especially in promoting human rights.
Jeffrey, because of you, there are people living with HIV and AIDS who have far more health and hope. There are artists who have the freedom and the support they need to inspire us all. And there are people, young and old, who are learning important lessons about the worst chapter in human history and the message of tolerance and respect that must guide us all in the future. The recent tragedy at the Jewish Community Center reminds us of the responsibility we each have to take against hatred. It reminds us that our differences, be they race or religion, gender or sexual orientation, will never be stronger than the common humanity that unites us all. Those are the lessons we learn from the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the courageous Holocaust survivors and rescuers there tonight. And those are the values that have guided our friend, Jeffrey Katzenberg.
So Jeffrey, again, Hillary and I congratulate you on this well-deserved honor. And we thank you for your lifelong dedication to educating and entertaining America's families. And again, we thank you for so many wonderful years of friendship. We look forward to many more.
That was made last month.
Fine. Oh.
I'll repeat it. They would like to know how to spell your last name.
D like in David, Y. B like in boy, Y.
B-Y, B-Y.
B-Y in Danish means town. You have it in Grimsby, Danby, many other B-Ys. I bought it for 33 kroner because I didn't like my hyphenated name, which was very, very much, even much worse than Davy. My name is Knud Deiring Olsen with a hyphen.
Somebody once said that Danish is less a language than a disease of the throat. It's rather hard to pronounce because it goes from the back of your throat to the front of your mouth.
Just try to say Knud with a soft D.
You're right. There's someone over here.
My question is, when you pulled the rescues and organized that, was that organized through your police department or through a political thing, or was that just a group of people that got together and supported them?
The question was whether the rescues were organized by the police department.
Unorganized at that time in 1943.
As you know, the theme of this year's lecture series is living in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And in the video, you said something about how you had been speaking about your experience, your participation in the rescue effort since 1984. I'm wondering, what happened between 1945 and 1984?
Still isn't. I had the experience when I was about 10 years ago invited to visit Israel by an attorney by the name of Sarno. And he lives in Palm Springs now. At that time, he lived in Chicago. And I had had some correspondence with Hashem, the memorial for the Holocaust rescuers, and what's the other name? And so when I was invited, I really had a correspondence with Yad Vashem that Denmark as such did not want any persons individually to be honored. because Denmark in total was honored. Because how do you honor people that just make a phone call or get a taxi or take the used people into their home for a night or two? It would have been a list of thousands and thousands of people that helped. So for my own part, I told her in Chicago that I couldn't go because the Freedom Foundation in Denmark had told me that Denmark in total was honored. Fortunately for me, the vice president of Yad Vashem was sitting next to Mr. Sama, and when he heard that I said that I couldn't come, he said, by all means, we want Knud to come down. So that was terrific, a very beautiful 8 days in Israel where we saw everything. And my own plaque on the Avenue of the Righteous of the Nations.
Cynthia?
When did you leave there and come to this country?
When did you leave Denmark and come to this country?
I was visiting the first time in 1947. I didn't immigrate until 1950.
Yes?
Why do you think so many Danes participated? I mean, this was their religion, their togetherness. What did they have, and why?
The question is, why does Knud think that so many Danes participated? Was it religion? Was it community? She'd like to know what your analysis is.
Just ordinary human goodness. And the fact that we had, at that time, we had never loved the Germans because we had fought them off for thousands of years. So when they came in and occupied our country, there wasn't any great love. Of course, Germans today, we have nothing against. They are Denmark's third biggest customer.
Third biggest customer. I'm sorry.
This is about the fear. Which things, despite intense fear, when we have a very strong moral sense about being all brothers and sisters? Very personal question. How strong was your fear in those dark nights when the Nazis were circling your waters? Did you feel any fear at all?
She's interested in the level of felt while you were doing what you were doing.
When you're 26, and one like me, you really don't mind a little bit of adventure. The other thing was the disliking the Germans as much as we did. And the third thing, that being simply humanitarian and being fairly good. In the police department, we would be instructed many, many times over again that they wanted us to keep Denmark peaceful, and they didn't want us to sabotage or do anything that would raise the wrath of the Germans. So we were actually told to try to keep population quiet and peaceful. We were a few of us that really didn't believe in that. But we had the instructions, and I would say there were some of the policemen that we took care of not asking them to participate because they went by the regulations, which of course is saying normally, but in the circumstances, it was nice to find a lot of the colleagues that participated in sabotage and underground activities.
George?
You talked about the Danes that were taken away to the concentration camps in 1944. What happened?
The question was, what happened to the Danes who were taken to Theresienstadt, to the concentration camps?
The Danes, there were...
The Danish Jews.
The Danish Jews in concentration, there were about 400 a little better than 400 Danish Jews in Theresienstadt. And thanks to the Danish government at the time, which were secretaries in various departments, we called them department chiefs, and they actually constantly bitched and worked with the Germans, and they said, you're not going to put our Danes into concentration camps, into Auschwitz, into killing. So none of the Danes were ever moved to Auschwitz. And they came back 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the occupation by the Bernadotte Red Cross buses that were allowed to pick them up, thanks to a Swede that had negotiated with Himmler and got his permit to get the Danes home. That means home. In that respect, Himmler told them to bring them over to Sweden. And Himmler also said that when the war is won, we wanted to bring them back in camps again.
I may have misunderstood George's question. I think he also asked what happened to the Danish policemen who were sent to the concentration camps.
They also were released something like months before the end of the war in April. Many of them were quite sick, but I think probably about 150 passed away down there. But they came back again, also on white buses into Sweden and back to Denmark in the month of May 1945.
It's a fact that more Danish citizens died in concentration camps than Jews who had been living in Denmark.
When the Germans came to arrest the Jews and they could only arrest 256, was there no retaliation against the Danish people?
Okay, it was 477. But when the Germans came to arrest the Jews, they found 477.
256 they found for one night.
For one night. Altogether it was 477.
The first night, 256.
But was there any retribution? Did the Germans exercise any retribution towards the Danes because they couldn't find the Jews?
Let's put it this way, that Mr. Himmler and Hitler were mad as heck over what happened. But they still needed some transportation through Denmark up to Norway of the troops. And also they put their hands on a lot of food products that they couldn't get in any other place. And so they knew the stubborn Danes would make an absolute folk strike, stop everything if they changed the laws.
Yeah, Jennifer.
How close were they to came back?
How were the communities changed when the Jews came back?
None, not so long. When the flags went up and the red carpet came out, and they were all welcomed back. And I don't want to say anything bad about Sweden, but really, they all wanted to come back to Denmark. and many places, they actually, people welcomed them back. Some places with dinners or receptions, and their apartments had been taken care of by women's organizations or by their neighbors.
I interviewed someone who said that when the family came back from Sweden, the neighbor who had been taking care of their house was very, very contrite when she said that she had taken one jar of preserves, a jar of preserves, out of the family store in the
basement.
cellar because her son was being sent to Germany for forced labor, and she wanted to send him off with something so that he would have something to eat on his journey. And she apologized profusely for having taken one small jar of preserves. It was quite remarkable.
My question is regarding, was there an agreement between Denmark and Sweden as far as this exchange with Jewish people, or was there like families to meet the Jews when Denmark passed them off, or was it kind of like just dropping them off and make your way in Sweden?
Was there an agreement between Denmark and Sweden about the Jews coming to Sweden? Were there families in Sweden who...
Mendes, several other people that are, that as Sukihara at Japanese, and there's several people that are Chinese communist, Consul Ho, and they help, and one of the people that are honored is a German by the name of Georg Duckwitz. And he not only informed Denmark about what was going to be coming, he was a naval attaché, and he knew that there was a ship coming into the port of Copenhagen to transport the Jews down to Germany. And Mr. Duckwitz informed the Danish Prime Minister about what was going to happen 2 days before it happened, and that was one of the reasons that we could help as many as we did. He later became an ambassador to Denmark.
I'm sorry, that was about something entirely different.
Oh.
Yes?
When they found out that the Germans were coming in to get the Jews, how was that word spread to the people for their safety? Was it over the radio? Was it spread over the mouth? They actually go to these homes, say, hey, this is what's happening?
Yeah.
The question was, how was the word of mouth spread that the Germans were going to come for the Jews?
In a small country, especially because 98% of the Jews were located in Copenhagen, it was easy. It was done by telephone and by word of mouth. And there's a story that goes that taxi driver would go in and tear out the telephone pages where it said Rosenberg and all Jewish names, and he would call them up and say, better get out of your home. But the Jews themselves were informed by their rabbi to get out of their homes. And many, not many, but many of them didn't believe that it was going to happen to them, because from 1940 to 43, the Germans had not demanded that the Jews to wear the Star of David, or had asked for them to be isolated in any way. So it was absolutely by unorganized word of mouth and by the goodness of people to help their neighbors. I'm always saying that I have made my speech and this thing so many times that I turn off my hearing aid. I don't want to hear it again.
I was just wondering how it's so that the homes of the Jews were protected by the Danish people, and that somehow the Germans didn't find out about it and destroy the homes anyway. How is it that
How did it come about that the homes of the Jews were protected and the Germans didn't find out about it and go in and destroy them anyway, or loot them anyway?
Again, it's thanks to the fact that the Germans did not want any problem in Denmark, and they told their soldiers and their officers to behave, and they actually did. In Denmark, they behaved.
real danger for your life?
Were there moments of when your life was in danger?
For about 2.5 years, constantly. And when you talk about the first transport I had down to the fishing boats were a few Jewish people, and in probably about 2 months' time, all the Jews were ordered. But we had a much more difficult and more dangerous time by saboteurs that were on the list of Gestapo because they had either shot some German or they had sabotaged a factory. So I would say it was a lot more dangerous to bring the saboteur down to the boat over to Sweden. And beside about 7,000 or 8,000 Jews in Sweden, there were about another 16,000 Danes over there that were on the Gestapo's list of arrest.
Could you tell us something about the king as a role model, the Danish king as a role model? What sort of hero was he, which really made a difference to the people?
John wants to know if you can tell us a little bit about the King Christian and the role he played as a role model for the people and how important that was.
King Christian X was all the time, I mean, he would be the one that would write in the morning all himself, no police to protect him. He would write and he would greet people very much so. I was a guardsman for the king for about 12 months. And normally he said he was a little bit of a sourpuss, but very Danish, and we knew that he, in negotiating with the Germans, were holding his own all the way. And when the Germans demanded a new government in Denmark, they did not want to arrest the king because, again, they didn't want too much trouble. So Christian said, under the circumstances, I am still imprisoned. I don't move from my castle. There's a beautiful legend about King Christian that said that when the Germans demanded the Jews to carry the Star of David. It is a beautiful legend. At one time, when he was 70 years old, Hitler sent him a congratulation telegram, and he was mad like Dickens because King Christian only said, accepted King Christian X.
How many of you had heard that the King of Denmark wore a yellow star?
Sorry to spoil the belief. King Christian had at one time participated in a service at the Copenhagen synagogue, and he all the time had negotiations with the rabbi in Copenhagen. And by the way, he was married to a German, Queen Alexandrine, and she was such a beautiful, beautiful person.
Ilka said they all are. If they're not German, then they're British. Yes?
It seems like there was more fear from the Germans than there was the people in
She says it appears that the Germans were more afraid of the Danes than the Danes were of the German soldiers. And were there any acts of violence in the street?
Yes, again, there was a lot of young people, saboteurs, that could use German weapons. And under certainly also under sabotages where the Germans would come and defend the fact there were fighting between the saboteurs and the Germans. And there are many, unfortunately, many of my friends that are buried in Copenhagen, saboteurs that were shot by the Germans. They're in a special park in Copenhagen.
I visited cemetery and happened to be there the day that was Armistice Day. And there were flowers on all of the graves, except for the German graves. There are some Russians who are buried there, some British soldiers. And a friend told me that in the German graves, the German soldiers are buried 3 and 4 deep. That they don't even, they have, do not have individual graves as well. And 50 years after the, well, let's see, 60 years after the war, they still were not putting flowers on the graves of German soldiers. So.
You were talking, I mean, asking about the danger. I would say that the danger about going on bicycle in Copenhagen with a British or an American airman beside you was a quite sure way to either be for German court and shot, or at least sent to concentration camp. I remember one Texan by the name of Charlie. I forgot his last name, but I was asked the underground to pick him up. He had been shot down to his P-51 had been damaged over a trip over northern part of Germany, and he, I wouldn't say landed, but he got it into the Danish waters about 5 miles off one of the islands, came into a fisher and farmer family, and they took well care of him, wined him and dined him, and they put him in a dark pants, turtleneck sweater, and a woolen cap on his head. And that's the way I met him in Copenhagen. And we went on bicycle, and as I said, yeah, I was only 25 and probably pretty stupid, because I thought Charlie had never seen the Germans very close. He had only seen them from up in the heavens, so that I thought it would be nice for him to come down to us, and I invited him for a cup of coffee at a restaurant that was hosting where a lot of Germans had their coffee or open-faced sandwiches. And all of a sudden, Charlie was well brought up, and he took his cap off, his woolen cap off, and he had a crew cut that no German would ever have. It would completely have given us away. I said, Charlie, for God's sake, put your cap on again. And later on, I took him down to the boat, and he was actually nailed in under one of the seats in the boat, and in the cabin. And they were inspected on the way out, but 2 hours later, he was in Sweden and on the way to Stockholm, and then from there on back to England. But that was more dangerous than being caught with a Jew.
I was just curious as to what your family thought about what you were doing and putting yourself in
What did your family think about putting yourself in danger?
I never asked them. but however, my brother was arrested in the early 1940s and brought into the Gestapo headquarters in Aarhus in Jutland. And he was there for something like 6 or 7 weeks. And I had asked my parents, I said, for God's sake, don't let them ever forget that they have him arrested. Ask him every day, the mayor of town, the minister, everybody, the schoolmaster, anybody, and keep going at the Germans that he's not innocent, but he's only done very little, something or no consequence. And the fact is that my mother one day went down to his schoolmaster, who was of German descent, called Wassmann. And Wassmann was also the president of Freunde Deutsche Literatur, so he was very well versed in German, and maybe he had some Nazi ideology or something. We didn't, I'll get it short later. But Wassmann went down and got my brother and another out of the Gestapo headquarters. And later on, he was killed by saboteurs as what we call a quisling, because of his German connections. He had probably informed of some of the people in town. And it's kind of a mixed feeling that he got my brother out, but he was killed by the underground.
I would like you all to thank Knud for filling in and rescuing us. More than welcome to talk with him, but we have another special treat, and I'd like to thank you, Knud, very much.
Thanks for your help.